For a while now, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been in the crosshairs of Israeli invective ranging from the comic to the inflammatory. A coalition of right-wing settlers has just launched a video ridiculing Kerry's ideas for solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Take a listen.
What I'm saying is, why fight over an old wall? I'll build you a brand new wall, close to the beach.
So that's some harmless fun. Prominent politicians, though, including a member of the Knesset, labelled Kerry anti-Semitic. America's National Security Advisor Susan Rice was moved to push back, tweeting, quote, personal attacks in Israel directed at Secretary Kerry, totally unfounded and unacceptable. And all of this, as we said, for the supposed crime of trying to push for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. There will, of course, always be disagreements between friends, but it's probably safe to say that there's never been a time when Israel is at such public loggerheads with its closest ally. Daniel Taub is a veteran Israeli diplomat. He's been at the center of these kinds of negotiations for years, and he is now Israel's ambassador to Britain, and we welcome him.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me. Obviously, I want to talk about the peace process, but first I want to ask you about all these things that have come up. Messianic, said your defense minister about Secretary Kerry. Anti-Semitic, say some members of the Knesset. You have actually been through, you have been teaching diplomats how to conduct diplomatic conversations. How do you, grade these?
Well, as you said, we are not known as a people for our bashfulness. And, what we say about other people is probably nothing compared to what we say about each other. And in particular, a case like this, where we're talking about intensive negotiations, we'll talk about them, but we're talking about really the most crucial existential issues. We've had, just in the last month, 20 missiles fired from Gaza over Israel. There were 2 that were fired just now, just today. So you can see that people care very, very passionately. As far as the relation with the US is concerned, I think you really have to look at what our leadership is saying. If you look at what the Prime Minister is saying, what our Foreign Minister is saying, what Tzipi Livni, the head of our negotiations, all of them have been absolutely unequivocal in their support for Kerry, expressing their admiration for his persistence, his commitment, his dedication. And I think that's the true Israeli feeling towards this effort.
I just want to push you because, of course, it was the defense minister who first started all of this, calling him, messianic. Secretary Kerry, who arrived here determined, operates from an incomprehensible obsession and a sense of messianism, can't teach us anything about the Palestinian conflict. He remains in place. But the anti-Semitic charge, that's pretty inflammatory. Again, you are versed in the art of diplomatic conversation. You've taught about it.
I think Secretary Kerry had stated it very well. He said that, I am focused on the goal. All of us have to be focused on the goal. That's where the Israeli leadership is. In the past, when we've tried to move forwards, we haven't let, maybe unfortunate wording or the passions of people divert us. And I think it would be a terrible shame if we were to do that at the moment.
Do you reject the anti-Semitic charge, at least?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's, I have to say that I'm not aware of a senior Israeli official that has used that term. And I think it was. I think there's absolutely no doubt that we recognise that at its root, Israel, the United States have shared interests, shared concerns about the region, and we very much want the Kerry initiative to succeed.
Well, then, let me move on to that. Obviously, we showed this satirical video. Settlers are somewhat up in arms, and they're high passions. First and foremost, do you think that there can be an agreement, this framework agreement finalised and everything by the end of the year, as Secretary Kerry has said?
I think we actually do have a moment of opportunity here. I think that Israel recognises that. I think that some of the traditional spoilers in our region, like the Hezbollah terrorist organisation, like the Hamas terrorist organisation, are actually on the back foot at the moment, particularly Hezbollah for the support that it's giving to Assad in Syria. I think that there are other countries, our neighbours, are looking like us at some of the potential dangers in the region, particularly if you were to see Iranian hegemony. And we're realising that we have strategic interests in common. We have, obviously, the United States very dedicated, and we have an Israeli government which is actually doing things, remarkable things, to try and advance peace.
Let me ask you about that before I try to get some details out of you. You've mentioned, obviously, a lot of opposition from the usual suspects, but the Prime Minister faces a lot of opposition from within his own coalition. Naftali Bennett has been forced to apologise for actually attacking the Prime Minister and questioning his morals in terms of trying to go forward with this agreement. So it's very difficult from your side, too.
It is difficult. We're talking about tremendously painful, risky compromises. If you look where the Israeli people are, it's very interesting. You can look at the surveys, and the vast majority of Israelis are prepared to make the tough decisions, the territorial concessions that will be necessary for peace. But at the same time, they're also genuinely concerned, because over the last decade, every piece of land that we've pulled out of, we've seen turned into launching pads for missiles and terrorist organizations' attacks against Israel. And what we really need to see is some sense of security, some conviction that peace is actually going to support security and actually not work to undermine it.
So let me ask you, you've obviously read everything like we have. I mean, you know the details. We see the Tom Friedman-Kerry plan. We see some Israeli newspapers having put out what they believe are the key points of the plan. So it's going to be unveiled soon, we understand, calling for an end of all conflicts and claims, a phased Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank along the 67 lines, unprecedented security arrangements in the strategic Jordan Valley, although some have said along the Jordan River. Is that right?
You know, I mentioned some of the optimistic elements, the reason why we have a moment of opportunity. Another cause for optimism is the fact that the negotiators on both sides have been so reticent about speaking public. And the fact is, when that's happened in the past, that's a sign that some of these things are actually happening. I think what we can rely on are statements by the US leadership and others that we have a depth of engagement today dealing with the critical issues in the conflict that we haven't seen for a very long time.
Can you imagine NATO troops along the Jordan River?
If we're talking about the possibility of international troops, I'll share with you the fact that Israelis are concerned, because it's not the first time we've had international forces introduced in our region.
Would Israel agree?
And I just want to share with you the Israeli thinking about it. You know, we've seen Israeli forces been introduced. We had a European Union assistance mission trying to monitor the border between Gaza and Egypt. When we pulled out of Lebanon, we had what was called a robust UNIFIL. Today we see UNIFIL there with actually more rockets in its armory than Britain, Germany and France combined. And so we are concerned. The phrase that one Israeli commentator used is that international forces are sometimes like an umbrella that melts in the rain. And if at the end of the day we are putting our security, the security of our families on the line, then we need to be sure that this is something that's going to be very resilient.
I want to get your genuine feelings on the necessity to come to an agreement, as we've seen even with the Scarlett Johansson SodaStream controversy over the ad. The idea of boycotting and sanctions, that whole BDS movement, is now entered the mainstream. There are many, you know, big European entities that are boycotting and divesting and stuff. Are you concerned about that? Is that something, the expansion of this, that is concerning Israel right now?
We are concerned about it. I don't think that is the reason that we want peace. Actually, the reason that we want peace is because we want peace. Because we don't want to be at war. We don't want to have a situation where our kids have to go into the army and so on and so forth. And in fact, in practice, I actually have to say that I think even today the boycotters, these people, these activists, are really not the mainstream. I see, for example, UK-Israel trade, which has doubled over the last 10 years and is continuing, particularly in the technological fields, in medical sciences and so on. We have Google and Yahoo and Microsoft, you know, straining at the leash to come and do work and R&D in Israel and so on and so forth. I think there is a mistake, however, in the thinking of the boycotters, because if they genuinely want to advance peace, what they're really doing is they're sending a double message, which is very problematic. The first message they're sending a message to the Palestinians is that you don't need to be sitting at the negotiating table. And one of the hardest things that we have to do is to actually keep the Palestinians there. We are releasing, as you know, brutal murderers simply because the Palestinians have asked us to release these terrorists to keep them at the table. And to suggest to them that they can go off to other places to try and get political gains, I think would be very, very damaging.
Lots more to discuss at another time. Very briefly, though, you think by the end of this year there'll be something to celebrate? We very much hope so. We very much hope so. Israel is putting itself on the line, showing flexibility on the most crucial decisions, and nobody wants peace more than we do. Ambassador Taub, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.